And we are live about now. Hopefully people can see us and hear us.
Mark and Tim have got their microphones on mute.
They have.
Actually, which is a good idea, unless you're speaking.
Yeah, well, I've got a lot of people coming in and trying to manage about 4 things at the moment. That's okay. Something's not working.
I'm deliberately muted.
Yeah, something's not. Why is this not working? I'm getting messages, I think, from lots of people saying it's not working. Oh, come on. Let's have a quick look here, see if this is working. We're apparently live.
If it helps, Ben, I'm getting a message saying your browser doesn't currently recognise any of the video formats available.
No, we are live.
We are live on YouTube.
Yep.
Fantastic.
Okay.
Good evening, everybody, and a very warm welcome to our evening gathering from St Altman's Church. We're going to begin by joining with many Christians around the nation tonight. I invite you, if you've got a candle, we're going to light it. And as we light our candles, we're going to be invited to put them in our windows as a sign that Jesus is the light of the world, a light that the darkness cannot quench. Even in the dark times that we find ourselves in, the light of Christ burns. We're going to go live now over to church where Bill is, and Bill's going to light a candle on our behalf as a reminder that as a church we are praying in these dark times. So shall we take some time to pray together? Father God, we know that the light of Christ shines even in the darkest of places and in the darkest of situations. Father, we're aware that the darkness of coronavirus has swept not only over our land, but throughout the world. Father, we pray that the light of Christ will bring hope and healing in this situation. We pray for scientists who are engaged in coming up with a vaccine, that you would inspire them in their work. We pray for doctors and nurses and healthcare workers, that you would be with them and that they would be kept safe and that they would be able to help those who are suffering in body from this virus at this time. We pray for all who seek to support those in need, for those enabling food to go out to those who need it, for those who are working to keep things clean, to those who are engaged in so many different things to keep our economy turning. Father, we pray that you would deliver us at this time from this disease that is stalking our world. We pray for those who are suffering, that you would bring them healing. And we pray for those who have already lost their lives, that you would bring comfort to their friends and their family who are mourning their loss. Father God, may the light of Christ shine from these candles as a reminder that you are hope, no matter what. Amen.
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 So I'm going to place my candle in the window across there. Welcome to my lounge. And as I do that, I'm going to hand back over to Ben.
So yeah, hello everybody. My name's Ben. I am Pioneer Minister at St Altman's, and I host and kind of facilitate Liminal most weeks. Now, this is going to be slightly different this week. We are obviously distant from each other. And Susie used a great phrase this morning, which was, we may be socially distant, but... no, what was it, Susie? Be socially distant, not socially distanced.
Yeah, something like that. I nicked it from someone else.
Yeah, so
Great
basically...
Great phrase.
Yeah.
Social...
Socially distant, do not be socially distant.
Distance, but not distant. Yeah, it's a great phrase.
Yeah, distanced, not distant.
Yeah, connect.
And I'm hoping that this is going to usher in a new realm of life and conversation for Liminal and what it might look like moving forwards with different types of interaction. So do forgive me if I'm slightly distracted because I'm trying to manage about 4 different screens at the moment. But I'm going to give it a good go. So generally, when we start Liminal, we we don't normally introduce ourselves because most of us know who we are. But if it would be great just to go around for those of us who are wanting to engage in conversation and introduce yourselves. So as I say, I'm Ben. I am 30. I'm married. Got a couple of kids who are upstairs at the moment, trying to be quiet. My wife is poorly, so we're self-isolating and have been since Wednesday. So yeah, that's me at the moment. Let's go to Mark Bellis, because you can't see Mark Bellis, but Mark Bellis is here.
His spirit is with us.
Yeah, dear me, a little more than that. Yeah, so I'm Mark. I'm 46, married to Angela. We don't have any children, but we do have a lot of Lego. I'm also known as Brixus, which is the name that comes up in the comments on YouTube, where you see a picture of my BB-8 droid as an icon there. I also have a Nemo fish that is blown up 5 to 1. So that's kind of hobby, and quite a few friends online are into Lego. I work at Rolls-Royce, which is another group of people who I like to share Jesus with as much as they will allow me. Obviously, you have to be a little bit careful what I say at work. But yeah, it's good to have that contact with people in various parts of the world, and good to be online with you guys.
Awesome, thank you, mate. Andy.
Oh yeah, I'm Andy Meek. I'm 65 years old. Can you believe it? I live in Spondon, and I'm a student of theology with the Church Mission Society, finishing this summer. So interested in pioneer mission work using music.
Thank you, mate. Mark, other Mark.
I'm Mark Lewis, involved with St Altman's for about 10 years. Been involved in the evening service for about 10 years, in fact. Been involved in Liminal through a load of iterations. The latest one being sat in your own room talking over a webcam, which is nice.
Susie.
I am Susie. I'm 30 odd. I live with my husband Andy. I'm currently the interim minister at St Altman's. I may leave this conversation, not because I don't love you guys, but we have a 4-month-old baby girl, and she is being a bit screamy, and my husband has dealt with a lot of screams for the last 3 nights in a row, and I promised him that if she started screaming again, I would leave you guys to get on with the conversation. So apologies if I speak out.
That's fine. Priorities. We tend to kind of go around and just sort of ask each other how we're doing, but I just want to briefly say a couple of things about how our conversation happens at Liminal. because some people, particularly if you're watching via YouTube and you've not necessarily experienced a liminal gathering before, they're a little bit different to kind of, I guess, standard conversation. In that it's standard conversation, but it's not necessarily standard church conversation. So we are very open with each other. We don't judge people. We recognise that people have different views, different opinions. Liminal is a community that is made up of a whole host of people with a whole host of ideas and thoughts, and we aim to learn from each other. We aim to learn through conversation, through listening well, and through asking good questions. So that's kind of generally who we are and what we do. We normally do this in the pub at Five Lamps, but unfortunately, as per government guidelines and government regulation, Mark's got a bottle of Corona, which I think is wonderfully apt. Unfortunately, the shop had run out of beer, and I didn't have time to get myself a whiskey before I came on. But otherwise, I would have done.
I'll get one for you, Ben. It's all right.
You get one for me, thank you. Or you'll drink one. Did you say you'll drink one for me? Yeah. Oh, there we go. We can see Mark Bellis now. Well, you can see your icon, Mark, so we know that you're here, which is good. Yeah, so I wanted to chat briefly about mental health, and I thought we could have a quick chat about that. Isolation is something that is becoming ever more present, particularly in the current climate. So I just wanted to ask you folk who are on at the moment, do you have any suggestions or any kind of ways in which we might either combat that kind of isolation ourselves or help others to combat that isolation, or reach out into our communities to help people still connect? Has anyone got any ideas?
Yeah, well, I'll just throw this in. I think one thing that helps is if you can understand for yourself what kind of person you are. So I'm quite solitary by nature, and I've spent weeks studying on my own at home, and the current lockdown hasn't made any difference to my lifestyle whatsoever, right? Because I live on my own and I go to the shops when I run out of food, and a lot of the time I don't, that's how life is for me. So, but I'm happy. That's okay, because I'm solitary by nature. But other people who are not like that, who need a lot of affirmation and bouncing off other people and all of that, I don't know how they cope. They're the ones who are probably suffering more from it because they need something and they're not getting it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I'm getting a bit stressed by all these video calls and online church services that I have to go to, and people phoning me up saying, "Are you all right?" And I'm thinking, "Yeah, normally you phone me up about once a month." Phone calls.
So is this a good thing for humanity then? Do you think we're kind of realising that we need to reach out more?
I think it will be eventually, once everybody's got ill and got better and the economy's recovered. I think there's going to be a big change for church. I think it's a bit abrupt. It's not a technological change. It's a realising I think we've maybe got a different position in the world than we thought we had.
Mm. Yeah. Do you have any thoughts, Mark? Either Mark, really.
Well, I noticed the difference with working at home because most of Rolls Royces now on a week-on, week-off basis. We've divided into red and blue teams, and one team attends work and the other team works at home. And we've taken to having a half-hour daily meeting by WebEx, which is similar to this. Which, okay, I find that a bit of a pain in terms of breaking my concentration, but it's very valuable to be all kept together and working as one team and sharing needs that we have as we work together. I think in my own work, I prefer the longer, deep thinking tasks. And at work, I sometimes use earplugs. Because if I used headphones with music, I might end up singing and annoying people. I do find a difference because my little bedroom where I have my computer is a lot smaller than a nice open plan office where I can see a bit further. So I do have a window to see out of here, but I do make sure to get out for a walk every day when I can, as long as they'll allow us to. So I'm determined to try and get a bit more sleep when I don't have to go to work, and good exercise to try and get a bit fitter during this time. So I don't feel like I've wasted the restrictive time.
Yeah. What part do you folk think prayer might have in helping combat this kind of isolation that a lot of people are feeling? Do you think prayer is should be encouraged wider in terms of helping us combat this? What are your thoughts?
I would have thought so. In some ways, my world has completely collapsed. I'm at home with a 4-month-old baby, and all of our things that we were involved in class as non-essential social contact. So we were out and about every day doing lots of different activities, and now we're at home. And I was very strict with myself last week and decided that I was going to start a much stricter rhythm of life, of getting up in the morning, making sure that I pray in the morning. Andy, my husband, and I always pray together at night, but ensuring that happens. I think we have been given an opportunity, a gift of time. Some of us, those of us who do have the time, some people are just rushed off their feet, and it's going to be like that for the next few months. Others of us have far too much time that we don't quite know what to do with. And I think maybe encourage people to think, what have you always wanted to do that you've never quite got around to doing? What hobby have you said, I'll learn Spanish, or I'll learn to knit, or I'll sort the garden out? But also about being mindful as we do this. We can't go very far, any of us anymore. But nature is springing up all around us, and being aware of that and being reminded of God's beauty and God's blessing through creation, I think is one of the ways I really want to appreciate the coming weeks and months through prayer as I'm out and about, even if that just means out and about in my own garden and looking out and about through the front window.
Now, Mark Lewis, you're going to be one of the kind of few people, I think, who are going to be actually going to work, right?
Ironically, I start work tomorrow. Having had 3 months being at home, being unemployed, I've landed myself a job working for a medical pharmaceutical warehousing and distribution company.
It's a good industry to get into these days.
We're quite busy at the moment. I start work 1:30 tomorrow. And there's been a little bit of me over the last couple of days that's realised that all those jobs I've applied for, all those jobs that I've gone for interviews for, probably would have laid me off during this last week. True. Working at a conference centre is not really sustainable at the moment. Working for a charity which does a lot of exhibitions to churches is not really sustainable at the moment. So all those jobs that I've been through, I got really frustrated that I hadn't got. Perhaps it was a good job I didn't get them. I start work tomorrow. I received a letter on Friday that designated me as a key worker, which means my child's going to attend school.
That's great.
Great, if I could remember having one.
Where did I put it?
Yeah, I'm sure I would have remembered.
Yeah. Send a doll into a school or something.
I think I could auction this letter for a moment. So.
Yeah.
But, I mean, coming back to your question on mental health, and I think there's almost in your question of how do we help ourselves or how do we help others, I don't think it's an either or. I think we're helping both. I think, in my experience over the last week, Ashbourne has set up a sort of community support system so that the entire town has been covered to kind of catch people who are socially isolated, alone, or kind of on their own. Now, I've kind of volunteered for this, got involved with about 50 houses on my road, and it's great that about 10% of those have contacted me already with we're okay, but thank you for doing this. And it was great that I'd had that social interaction with people that I wouldn't normally have come across. I've had a couple of people contact me and say, would you be able to go and get this shopping? Would you be able to do that for me? One's a friend anyway. One was somebody who are in their 80s, had a heart bypass, and were just quite anxious about it. And to have that social interaction is good for them, is good for me. And I think it's mutually beneficial rather than as beneficial to one side or the other. I've been very conscious setting things up during this week, supporting family, supporting friends, particularly within our community group, as to how are we going to respond to what could be a week, could be much more likely to be a lot more than a week, of how are we going to virtually support each other, how are we going to be involved, what things can we do? What is almost an adjusting to the new norm. But I think that's kind of been good for everybody. It's not just good for my mental health to have something to work at, but it's good for the person who I'm working with as well. So I think there is a mutual benefit rather than it being a one or the other.
Yeah, I think, especially now with so I don't know if you'll have seen the latest government update is that they're going to be shielding about 1.5 million of the most vulnerable people, which basically means they're going to send them a letter that says don't leave the house for up to 12 weeks. So they are doing that now. And so particularly for those folk, it's going to be really, really important that the kind of wider society and wider community steps in. And that's where I think the church does a really good job, in that we have this community that actually does... Oh, I'm getting something. I'm getting my dinner delivered.
You're getting a cup of tea delivered too.
By someone who didn't quite understand that when I put a note on there saying, please put the food on the floor outside because we are in self-isolation. After knocking on the door, stood there holding a bag out to me.
So I think that's... Mark says hi.
Wow.
I think it's going to be really important to kind of reach out particularly to those folk as a church. Thank you. And as the church. So, yeah. The kind of topic of conversation beyond that was Lydia. And it seems kind of apt, I guess, to talk about Lydia and business people, given the kind of climate that we're in at the moment and how important and significant business is. I would encourage you at this stage, please go and support. Please still be supporting your local businesses. If there's any time to order loads of takeaway, it's now.
It's your Christian duty, is that right? That's what you're telling us, isn't it?
Absolutely. It is your Christian duty to order takeaway if you can afford it.
I noticed Adam said that this morning because he's the manager at Pizza Hut near Costco.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. He, bless him, he sent me a photo. This is a guy at St Augmans who manages a Pizza Hut yesterday, and he was very, very bored. It's nothing to do, I think. So... Oh, bless it. So yeah, so do engage if you're watching via YouTube. By the way, do engage on the chat. I'd love to have your input as well. Michael's just put that someone's done the kind of contact bit on their street. It says it's frustrating that it couldn't be them doing it because they're deemed to be vulnerable. And I think, I mean, I've had conversations with folk in a similar situation actually, where maybe because of their age, they're considered to be vulnerable, and they really want to be out helping people. So I think we need to think about and pray for those folk as well.
Yeah, for many of us, technically as an asthmatic, I fall into the vulnerable category. Life, we are used to going out and doing stuff for people, and it's a huge, huge shift that's really painful. That means that we can't. And I know that, like Ben, I've spoken to lots of people over 70 who would like to go out and do stuff, but actually, it is what we are doing for our nation is staying at home.
Yeah, no, that's right. So I'm just going to read the story of Lydia. So it's, for those of you who want to follow along, it's Acts chapter 16, and I'm going to be reading from the Message translation. It's verses 11 to 15, and then verse 40 as well. Putting out from the harbour at Troas, we made a straight run for Samothrace. The next day, we tied up at New City and walked from there to Philippi, the main city in that part of Macedonia, and, even more importantly, a Roman colony. And we stayed there for several days. On the Sabbath, we left the city and went down along the river, where we had heard there was to be a prayer meeting. We took our place with the women who gathered there and talked with them. One woman, Lydia, was from Thyatira. I should have read this before. From Thyatira, and a dealer in expensive textiles, and was known to be a God-fearing woman. As she listened with intensity to what was being said, the Master gave her a trusting heart, and she believed. After she was baptized, along with everyone in her household, she said in a surge of hospitality, "If you're confident that I'm in this with you and believe in the Master truly, come home with me and be my guests." We hesitated, but she would not take no for an answer. And then verse 40, when the officers reported this, so that's Paul going to being freed. The judges panicked. They had no idea that Paul and Silas were Roman citizens. They hurried over and apologised, personally escorted them from the jail, and then asked them if they wouldn't please leave the city. Walking out of the jail, Paul and Silas went straight to Lydia's house, saw their friends again, encouraged them in the faith, and only then went on their way. So a great question that comes from that, and we're taking these from the chat zone from this morning, is this. So Lydia was clearly a successful businesswoman in a man's world, in a world that was dominated by a patriarchy. For you, what about her and her story inspires you? Or perhaps another question would be, what line of work, what sort of work really inspires you? Is there a kind of particular type of business perhaps, or job role that really makes you go, wow, yeah, that's impressive? I'll tell you what, I've got one. Something that and this genuinely inspires me, is the amount of engineering that happens in our city. So in Derby, there's a massive amount of engineers, and it's a type of it's a way of thinking and a way of being and a way of doing that I just can't rack my head. I just can't get my head around it. It's a specific type of knowledge, and without it, and without the incredibly precise thinking, cars wouldn't work, planes wouldn't work, trains wouldn't work. Now, I've got a friend who lives down the road who's a lighting engineer who designs has been designing lighting systems for trains, and I just kind of think, well, just stick some wires in and plug the lights in, but far more complicated than that. There's a whole science and art to it, and I find it absolutely mind-blowing, to be honest.
I think for me, to answer your question, and possibly this is about my background, family background, it's just the system of manufacturing. When stuff gets made, a raw material goes in at one end and something gets churned out at the other. Now, I've spent my life watching factories. Initially, my dad was employed in them. Initially in textile, latterly in paper. But there was something magical almost about the kind of, and it was partly the engineering that went into it, but it was about making stuff happen and productivity and production of a raw material went in at one end and something new, clean and tidy came out the other. And there might have been a very rough and ready, and there was, let's be honest, there was a very rough and ready process that went in between it. And there was a lot of cursing and effing and blinding in the manufacture. But there was also something quite magical about watching that process, particularly latterly in paper, when you could walk the length of the paper mill and see it go from pulp to paper. And you could see the stuff that was coming off as waste, and you could see the refinement of the process as it went through. And having worked in part of that, but I found that something that we've almost lost in this country, of that manufacturing element over the last 20, 30 years, that factories don't do that anymore. We kind of offload that to abroad and it goes further away. And we appear to have become distant from that in society.
Yeah. Yeah, we have. Mark or Andy or Susie, have you got anything? Or we can move on.
I was going to say, I'm always inspired by people that do things that are techie. My entire working life has been around people, what people often describe as soft skills. And so anyone that can do anything that's techie, engineering, IT, that kind of thing, I'm just completely in awe because I don't understand it, don't really get it. But I'm very grateful for those that are in that business. It makes our world go around.
Yeah, so I worked for Rolls-Royce for over 30 years, and I'm an engineer. And there's a certain culture amongst engineers which is a little bit hard-nosed. It's not what you'd call a lovey-dovey kind of culture at all. And yet, looking back at it now from a couple of years' distance, I can see there is a kind of love, especially in Rolls-Royce, where great attention is paid to the technical detail. Where if you're designing something or almost whatever you're doing, really, people are very careful and precise, and they really are trying to do a good job, because quite often the machines eventually that get made, which might be a jet engine, say, ultimately somebody's life or a whole aircraft full of people, their lives are going to depend on that machine working properly. And I think everybody's conscious of that. And so there is a kind of embedded, I'll call it care for society, that people try to put into their machines and into their work. And it's not a sort of an emotional care, but it's a sort of it's a goodwill towards mankind kind of intentionality in the way people work carefully and thoroughly and so on. And I honour that among the engineers. They wouldn't even articulate it themselves and admit to it probably, but I think they try to do their best.
Yeah.
I'm, as an engineer and a safety engineer, I have a passion that...
Not a safety engineer.
Yeah.
I did about 10 years as a safety engineer at the Rainsway establishment that you may have heard of.
Yes, I've worked there for a little while. That's where I moved across into safety. I'd done electronics as my degree, and then I worked in controls, did some aerospace, had to move to Rainsway when they ran out of work, and then moved across to safety of control systems, and then eventually moved back to fix the aircraft. But I have a passion for helping jet engines to be more efficient and cleaner. So one of the things we've thought about is how to reduce the emissions. The ways of doing that might involve making it more dangerous unless I put something in that makes sure that doesn't happen. So there's very much a trade all the time. There are many factors that we have to work together to find the optimum point. So if we want better performance and low emissions, we have to make sure it's fundamentally safe and then reliable, because if it's not reliable, it won't be profitable or saleable. So there's a lot of factors there. So we do some trade studies, and I like to work at the early stage of the products to try and put in the fundamental safety into all the candidates for a certain system, and then try and help people to pick the right ones to go forward, which is kind of an uphill struggle when you're dealing with personal opinions and people's emotional involvements if they've designed a particular thing. So I also try to design a few of my own, just to say, well, yeah, I understand the parameters here. Here's a candidate of my own that I know is safe, and let's compare it with all of the others and see how it fares. So that's the kind of thing I'm passionate about, the kind of thing I might actually do outside of work, beyond what I'm asked to do at work. But that kind of thing keeps me interested. And I do ask God for inspiration for these things, because I know that we need to try and, if we're going to fly, we want to do less to wreck the environment. But unfortunately, everything I do can't seem to keep pace with the amount of extra flying people want to do. So that's a constant battle, really. That's
interesting. I think that so Mark, you mentioned something earlier as well about how you kind of try to kind of share your faith at work as much as possible, given what as much as your colleagues will allow you, and it raised an interesting question, because Lydia's life was transformed by Jesus. It's transformed by her newfound faith. She found this new sense of hospitality, and she seemed to really sort of open up. And Michael put something quite interesting in the chat, actually. He asked a question, which is it more inspiring to develop things or develop people? Which is an interesting it's an interesting question, because it raises some questions perhaps about the nature of work. But how have you guys found faith transform your work life, if at all?
I mean, like I say, considering what Jesus would do in my position, the objective is safe flight for people. So the other objectives have to be better for the environment, more efficient, and obviously it's got to meet certain company parameters like being profitable. And other than that, basically the people at work, many of them are unchurched people or sometimes church reluctant people, and they need a positive witness of Jesus in that place. I did have one chap say, that's the best sermon I'd ever heard. Something I'd said, and I thought, well, I kind of didn't say anything out of the ordinary of what I said to him, but so we practice values of acceptance. And at work there are groups on appreciating diversities. Another thing I've thought of, one of the diversities being the gender diversity. So I thought, well, if we want to attract more female engineers, you have to give them the choice when they're young before they choose their A-levels, because an engineering degree needs certain A-levels, and then engineering jobs need certain degrees. So you kind of have to choose around 11 plus to decide what subjects you're interested in to develop. So I built a model that might attract a wider range of people of that age group. So we'll see how that goes.
That's brilliant. Any other thoughts or experiences?
Well, here's an experience. Just I don't think there's a way I can share photos with you as sort of electronically.
No, not that's going to make it awkward.
Yeah, okay. A couple of years ago, I went on an air-conditioned coach pilgrimage in the footsteps of St. Paul, and we in Greece, and we went to Philippi, and we went to there's a bit of a shrine where Lydia apparently did her whatever she did with the cloth and the women, and was baptized. There's a bit of a shrine there, and so I've got a little connection with her. I think somebody might be able to correct me. Was she the first convert or first named convert in Asia? Sorry, I don't know what you call it.
Asia Minor.
Yeah, Europe, the Europe side of Istanbul, anyway.
Yeah, she was.
Yeah, so I feel like I've met her. I've seen a little icon of her inside a kind of shrine, but good for her.
Yeah, it's something. It's a world in which, like, not only can I not kind of quite comprehend just the world anyway, as it was back then, in ye olde New Testament times, but to know what it would have been like to be a woman then, I just have no comprehension at all. And to be a woman in that world who then also converts to Christianity, I've got no way of understanding what that means. And it's something that, Mark, you talked about giving female engineers opportunities, and I think that's something that the church. Well, I don't know, Susie. What do you think? Do you think the church needs to be giving more opportunities to women and being more open, or do you think they're doing a good job at the moment? What are your thoughts as a female vicar?
As a female vicar, I kind of want to say that I think Lydia is an incredible woman to have made it how she did. I think we can quite easily underestimate her, but she was someone who the church met in her home. She would have been one of the first church leaders. I think it depends on where you are in the church, depends on what the opportunities are and how easy it is. For myself, I've been in church leadership. I've been ordained for nearly 12 years. It's never been an issue, my gender. I have been very blessed to work under a number of incredibly gifted male colleagues for whom my gender has never been an issue and have given me incredible opportunities to do stuff. That's not everyone's experience. And I think it's really important that we encourage people, both young men, young women, to live out and flourish with the gifts that God has given them. I think it is hard for some women. I don't want to underestimate that. We live in a much more equal world than my parents grew up in, my grandparents grew up in. But there are some things that are more tricky for women. We've got a small baby. I have to stay at home and look after her because I'm feeding her. My husband can't stay at home and look after her as much as he would like to. There are certain things that being a mother or a father is different. But I think it's about giving opportunity to everyone. But in certain fields, really focusing on young women, such as science, technology, is really important because those are fields that they haven't naturally been encouraged to grow up in.
Yeah. Mark?
I think Michael makes an interesting point of whether it's more inspiring to develop people or...
Really interesting.
Coming back to where you started this kind of conversation thread, I think my response is actually you can't separate one over the other or one below the other. It's how you develop either of those things and how you use those skills that to me is more fundamental and more important. How you use that ability that God's given you, how you use those skills that are given to you to use, whether you use it selfishly, whether you use it selflessly. And that's the thing that kind of reading this story of Lydia kind of came over to me this morning, was that she was seeking out, she was using her skills, but her skill wasn't just in selling purple cloth. Her skill was in asking questions and making herself being open-minded to hearing a new idea. And perhaps the thing that really struck me when this story was read this morning was that she was doubted. Her sincerity, her Christian faith was doubted at the end of it. You know, that she had to really argue and say, well, if you really believe I am, then do this. And the number of Christians that I speak to who have said, well, it's almost like they don't believe I'm a Christian, or they don't trust me to be a, quote, proper Christian because of this that's happened in my past, or this that I've done once, or that I used to be. They don't recognise that. And I think for me, the inspiration in Lydia is that here's somebody, the first convert in Europe, as you were talking about, but she was still doubted. And whether she would have been doubted if her name wasn't Lydia, or her name was Peter, is another question. But whether she was doubted because she was female. But, you know, even through to the 21st century, how many times do we doubt, well, they're not really serious about their faith, or they're not really, otherwise they wouldn't do this. And that was one of the things that came out to me in the discussion and in the story.
Yeah. I'd not thought about that, actually, that she was doubted. And I kind of wonder if maybe, because I kind of get the impression that to be a successful businesswoman in a world and society like that, you would have had to be pretty forthright. You would have had to be strong, have a strong character. And so I wonder if part of it might have been that maybe they thought, well, Christians are soft and wimpy. I don't know. I'm speculating.
I wonder whether it was that they felt that she was bluffing. Or you're not really about this, you're just putting up a front to get what you want. And we don't believe you. And she almost had to be more Christian than they were to use a very bad phrase, that she had to go the extra mile to prove her faith and demonstrate it.
Yeah.
Which says something about us and how we judge others 21 centuries later, of how do we judge Christians who say, well, no, I've been converted, I've changed, do we actually believe that? Are we willing to take it at face value, or do we still question?
Yeah, that's a really good point, and there's something really important in there about discipleship and inviting people to follow Jesus and what that means. Lydia clearly experienced quite a radical transformation, but that came through. That transformation came through her just kind of going along to a prayer meeting, to a place where she was exploring something. She heard that this thing was happening, and she went along as a way of exploring her own spirituality. And particularly at the moment, in terms of social isolation, I really enjoy creating spaces where people explore spirituality and where people explore faith and life. But at the moment, it's tricky to do that. How have you got any ideas or thoughts about how, in the current climate of social isolation and social distancing, we might still create spaces for spiritual exploration for people who maybe don't come to church or wouldn't call themselves Christians?
One of the things I thought of during this week, and it's more for people who do come to church and would call themselves Christians, I'm afraid, is it struck me very much that the letters written in the New Testament were written to a church by a remote leader, often addressing a number or a few specific instances or specific situations. And I just imagined, what would a 21st century letter to the apostles of the Anglican Church in the UK, or the Anglicans in Derby, or the Christians in Derby, or the Christians themselves, addressing that particular situation? It just struck me, what would that look like? What would a similar letter? And I don't know the answer. I think my thinking came out from the Archbishop's letter at the start of the week, saying you may not be going to church, but you can still be church. And that's a paraphrase of a longer letter, but, church isn't shut. Church is operating differently, which was something that really kind of struck me. We need to rethink how we're being church. And it may be that in 6-12 months' time, church is looking very different.
I think people seem to be using the phrase "being church" a lot more since churches have closed. A lot of people who I would hear talking about doing church and going to church are talking about being church far more. That people are realizing that it's a state of being and a state of it's something about who we are rather than just what we do. And it's
church is a verb, not a noun.
Yeah, and it's been really inspiring actually, and encouraging to see that way of thinking is. It's kind of it's sort of a bit, maybe it's subconscious, but this has brought it much more to the fore. I think maybe for people who are more involved in sort of more consumer attractional models of church, where it is about going and experiencing it and going and watching a service and having something delivered to you. People are more aware now that they need to interact, I think.
I hope so.
Yeah.
A good thing that would come out of this horrendous situation that the world finds itself in.
I was chatting with our Mark.
I find it kind of ironic that because we're forced onto social media, I find myself more comfortable in this environment than I do face to face with lots of people. So on a Sunday morning, I will naturally get a cup of tea, and then I will look around and see lots of people talking to lots of people, and think, what on earth would I say to all these different people? And then my brain completely freezes with the quantity of it. So on this social media, using IT, I kind of fit.
That's interesting. So it's kind of offering or providing a new way in which people can interact. Some people particularly can interact better, which asks a very interesting question of what is the place moving forward long term for online church, and what does that look like? Because when I used to think of online church, it was high production value, multiple cameras streaming from within a megachurch. That's what I would think of when I think of online church. But maybe
I think that was just recently because of the current situation.
Yeah, and it's been happening more and more, and it's not that that's necessarily a bad thing, but that I think it promotes it promotes that kind of consumer way of being church, maybe, that we deliver it to you, you consume it, and then you go away, rather than we are in it together and we're talking and we're interacting, which is why I like the option that people have to, talk on the live chat, for example.
I suppose I first learned it at university, where we had bulletin boards and talkers, and I would spend far too long on these talkers, and it's how I learnt to type. So I got up to about 25 words a minute just by, I need to get this message out pronto before, to keep the conversation moving.
I had someone message me earlier who's watching, and she messaged me and said, how do you type so quickly? I said, well, just do.
It is literally practice and mistakes, and as long as the mistakes you make don't change the meaning of what you're trying to say, then it's okay, because otherwise you do have to dig yourself out of a few scrapes now and again.
At one point, I remember I was probably about 15, 16, and I used to frequent message boards and stuff, and like chat rooms and forums and things, and so became very competent with touch typing. And my mum came into the living room at one point, and I was typing away doing something. I think I was listening to Cross Rhythms, Rock in the Hard Place, which was an online radio show for Christian rock and metal music. And I was sat typing away. My mum came in and asked me a question, and I carried on typing and turned to speak to her, and she was absolutely gobsmacked that I was able to do this. But I think that says something about practice and about working hard. That, I mean, you don't necessarily always know that you do it, but the more you do something, the more competent you become at it, and the more it sets you up for something later on down the line. And I think Lydia was, I'd like to think that Lydia was maybe one of these people that she worked really flipping hard to get where she got to. She was successful, she had money, she clearly had a big home, and then when she started to follow Jesus, she realised that she could open up her home to people. She realised that she had this massive space that people could come and stay in and live in, and that kind of that sense of hospitality. I've never been somebody who's had a big house or anything like that, but I know people who do, and who do have big homes, and sometimes there's that part of me that goes, Wish I had a big house like that. But actually, I've come to realise and recognise that that's a real gift, having that kind of space. So what I wonder, what have you got, or what maybe in your, through your life have you, is a skill or a thing that you've got that you've honed and refined and worked towards that you can use, or perhaps that you are using, for either mission or evangelism or discipleship, to help serve the church, serve the community? Do you have anything like that?
I'll say something and then I must leave you guys because I need to go and look after my little one. As Ben said, he's always wanted to live in a big house. I've been gifted and blessed at living in some really big houses in my time, often on my own, and I have had the opportunity to use my home in the past as a place of hospitality. It's nearly 10 years ago now that when my sister and I were living together, she was living with me because she was doing a PhD and didn't have any money. So she was living with me to stop herself getting into debt. And it was during the time that she was with me that we felt very strongly that God was calling us to look after one of the asylum seekers that we'd come across, a young girl. And she moved in for 2 weeks that turned into 11 and a half months.
Wow.
And that was a real blessing to us and to her. We've had a youth worker live with me for a bit. And then I was known for having random American students live with me for a bit. My life has changed massively in the last 2 years, and that opportunity is not currently one that I have at the minute to offer my home in the way of hospitality in that kind of a way. So I think we move in different seasons of our lives, and we have different blessings at different times. And some of these things are for a whole life, and others are just for a short amount of time. And I look back and say that was a huge privilege to be able to offer hospitality. I currently can't do that. I don't know what God's got planned for me in the future. And I think the same with everyone, that we have gifts and opportunities to use that what we have that might go on for many years, or it might just be a very short amount of time. And what do we have that we can offer to God at this point is something. Thank you, Ben, for raising that again. It's something really important to think about.
That's right.
I love you and leave you all, but it's lovely being sharing in this conversation, and hope to see you soon.
Indeed. Cheers, Susie.
Thanks.
See you later. Bye. It's like a boys' club now, isn't it?
Do you know are you simultaneously broadcasting this out on YouTube?
Yes.
But it's output only, is it? So they can't communicate.
Yeah. No. Well, there's folk who are occasionally adding things in on the live chat. In fact, Michael's just said it can be a challenge for me anyway to enable Jesus to shine through every email I write. I feel the pain sometimes.
Michael.
The amount of times when I've written an email and deleted it and then rewritten it.
Oh yeah. Many emails take at least an hour to write because you write something and you think, oh, I can't say that. I mean, it's really odd at work how I struggle to keep my emails to only one page, and the shorter the email, the angrier I am. So if I can send somebody a 2-line email, I'm being very, very to the point and gritted teeth so as not to offend.
Yeah.
I remember somebody once said to me that everyone is made in the image of God, but sometimes that's really hard to remember on the 15th call trying to sell you insurance or double glazing or life protection, etc.
Yeah. No, it's very true. It can be a challenge.
I've seen both sides of that coin actually, because normally, like you guys, I don't necessarily like to receive nuisance calls, but then once I have something to advertise, I'm conscious that how do you persuade people positively without spamming them all the time?
Yeah, it's a tricky balance to get, isn't it? That kind of thing. But yeah, you've got to trust that you're doing the right thing, I think.
But you were saying earlier about the skills and that kind of thing. So last weekend we were at the National Space Centre in Leicester, exhibiting Nemo, the model that I built, and we found a couple of guys from another church. I forget exactly where, but we didn't know these guys knew Jesus, who were in the club and also exhibiting. So it was really great to meet some more guys who love Jesus in the community. We must have been, what were we, 30 to 50 exhibitors or traders of one sort or another, and the show attracted about 2,700 people over the weekend, which is small for that show because of the climate as it was increasing.
Yeah.
But it was good to get back into exhibiting because we've not done as much recently. But that sometimes I felt that the way that community behaves is, it isn't always Christ-like. If they get together in the evening after the first day of the show and the way the banter goes, it can be a bit coarse. But yeah, so it's kind of a deep breath with that one. But it's good to be in that community because God wants to be there.
Yeah, and it's a community that that not a lot. Well, I mean, I certainly speak for myself. I didn't even know it really existed, to be honest. But we all have these communities and these friends and these areas where we're called to go and be Christ, or be Christ-like, not be Christ. That's blasphemy, isn't it? Mark's nodding. Yes, it is blasphemy, Ben.
We're going to let that one go.
But it's important, I think, and you said something really good, Mark, that that some of the ways in which the community operates are Christ-like, and I think it's about seeing those things and finding ways in which to point out, hey, you know what? You're a bit like Jesus in this. You're a bit like Jesus, and it's challenging, but it's just about being honest about it. I think, I find this with for me with the wrestling community. I'm very much into wrestling, and the way in which everyone genuinely looks out for each other, and nobody is judged when they go to a wrestling show. Anyone can go. They don't discriminate at all. You don't get any odd looks if you're wearing certain clothes or anything like that. There are ways in which, in terms of the inclusivity that they operate, that is Christ-like, that is it's like a Christian community, or it's like a Christian community should be anyway. And it's about finding those things and building on it. And sometimes I think we can sometimes fall into the rabbit hole of create a Christian version of X, Y, or Z. So create a Christian Lego club, or a Christian board game club, or a Christian X, Y, or Z. Christian wrestling society or something. When actually I'm not sure that we should always be doing that or looking to do that. I don't know if anyone has any thoughts on that.
Well, who else is going to be Christians in wrestling, Ben?
A good friend of mine, actually. Good friend of mine called Gareth Thompson.
So there's two of you.
And Shawn Michaels is a Christian.
I think you're right. I think it's about being Christ in the community.
Yeah.
Sometimes I get quite frustrated by this sort of Christians in kind of culture, and it's like, well, what's Christian? What does that mean? You're Christians in the world society rather than the Christians in a particular sect of it. Now, I'm not saying that there's not a niche to witness in and to be part of a mission, but it's about being in the world. I'm very involved in an animal rescue centre in Ashbourne. There are a few other people who are churchgoers within that. But similarly, about 10 days ago, I had a very deep conversation with somebody who said, well, I grew up in Sunday school, but I can never get my head around why was God so angry? Well, you started the conversation. It wasn't me, but she chose to start it, and she chose to have that discussion with me. And she only chose. I was privileged that she chose to have that, but she was only because she knew me and that relationship had been built up. And I probably gave a very poor answer to it, but that's by the way. But
yeah,
it's not because I'm part of the Christian dog walkers community. Which is very different to the Christian dogging community, which is a completely separate.
Bye.
Oh dear.
Well, you may have noticed that on my alter ego name is at Brixus, so you can probably see why that is.
Well, I did wonder who it was who was commenting this morning, actually.
Oh.
I knew straight away as soon as I saw it.
No, I didn't cotton on as quick.
So many people in the Lego community start the name of things with brick because they're not allowed to use the word Lego because it's a trade name.
Really?
Yeah, they're very sharp on it.
Oh,
people get sued.
Flipping heck. That's harsh.
Well, that's what you get when you deal with a quality product. And they successfully sued the people who made counterfeit bricks in China.
That's impressive. To sue counterfeiters in China is impressive.
But these counterfeiters were just taking the instructions of a set, copying them, making a clone set with their own bricks of inferior quality and selling it. And that's going to disappoint children and put off potential engineers. It's terrible.
This is
terrible
true.
Tragedy.
This is very true. Yeah. What do you think, Andy? Because I know you're very involved in music stuff.
What was the question?
Maybe
rambling a little bit here, chaps.
Oh yeah, we are rambling. That's yeah. So it was about kind of using the things that we using the skills that we've got to serve the church or to do mission or evangelism, kind of outside the church rather than just sort of creating church, if that makes sense.
Yeah, well,
I'm tired. I apologise.
I think we should stop thinking about building the church or promoting it really, and think about building the kingdom of God, or maybe not even building it, just entering it into it in some way. And if you take that kind of view, then the church isn't really the central interest. And if you look at your own talents and aspirations, then I think you should follow them wherever they lead you, as long as it's legal. And I think if you do that with a Christian heart, then I think you are serving God and building the kingdom of God wherever you go. And nine people out of 10, that's not going to be in a church structure. It's going to be somewhere else, because, you know, somewhere there's all those engineers beavering away trying to make our jet engines more or fuel efficient, less polluting, and that you could say is, well, trying to make the world a better place is to use kind of everyday language. And I think if you do that with a Christian heart, then you're building the kingdom of God, although other people may not even know that you're doing it.
Yeah. I think that is genuinely a very good note to kind of end our conversation on. I'm aware that it's
bedtime.
Bedtime. It is
red wine time. 2 pints of beer down. I'm sat at home.
Yeah, I'm aware that this was supposed to be an hour. Maybe we put it for longer next time as well. But people were expecting an hour, and
okay. But I think an hour would be enough. Actually, I think it's quite intense.
Yeah.
Trying to pay attention and keep a conversation moving along for a couple of hours, not quite knowing who else around the globe is watching you.
It's true. Yeah, I think if you watch this, if you've got any feedback for us, well, for me, then please let me know. Yeah, we will kind of keep doing this once a week on Sunday evenings. If you want to get involved, if you want to come on and chat, then do. I'm going to think a bit more maybe about how we do this in a slightly more refined manner. Keep the conversation flowing a bit more, maybe. Yeah, it's all work in progress. We're figuring it out, but yeah. Well, chaps, thank you so much for joining and for engaging. Mark, you're muted. Mark Lewis, was that intentional? I can unmute you if you want, mate.
Okay.
Hey. It was unintentional. Yeah, so thank you, chaps, for joining. Have you got any last thoughts or words or things that you want to briefly share with the folk at home or with each other?
I was just thinking, since it said about Lydia being from Thyatira, obviously one of the churches in Revelation is to Thyatira. So the church there is noted for love and faith and service and perseverance. And then, goes on about some bad stuff after that. But, so yeah, I didn't know. I mean, like it says, Lydia's from Thyatira. Well, was she based there and had a house in Philippi, indicating her wealth, or was she then a part of the church in Philippi thereafter? I've not really read around it that much, so.
That's an interesting question. Yeah, one for you to research, Andy, maybe.
Well, it's just down the road, really, where the shrine in the river was from Philippi. It's like a couple of miles away. They're not really towns anymore.
Okay, so the invitation to her house could have been just a couple of miles down the road then.
Yeah, I think it's all sort of within a walking distance radius, really.
Okay.
Yeah, because actually, what was on the prayer storm thing that I often watch on the TBN channel. Recently, the talks have been around the church in Thyatira and how to sort out some of the bad stuff that is gone into in Revelation.
Right.
So that's quite challenging stuff. Not necessarily for a sermon, but probably something to take up in the sozo if God prompts you to do that.
Yeah. No, it's interesting to think about. No, cheers, Mark. Mark or Andy, you got any final thoughts or words or? things to
I
share?
think for me, the big take-home message from the story of Lydia was her openness to God, actually. Both sitting there listening initially to responding to that calling, and to respond to that calling to becoming baptized, and then to respond to that calling in practical terms, in opening up what she had to offer and holding the wealth that she had lightly. And perhaps especially at the moment, to hold what we have lightly for the sake of the community is kind of something that's important.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. Andy, have you got any final thoughts?
No, I think it's time to go. My final thought.
All right. Well, thank you, chaps, and thank you, Susie, for earlier. Thank you for all of those who have watched and who have got involved via the online chats. Please do let me know any feedback. You can send me an email or a message, or send a message via the YouTube page, and we'll pick that up. All right. Good night, folks, and see you same time next week.
Good night.
Okay.
Good night, guys.